Hello everybody, welcome to this new class of the Rule Governance course. Today we are going to talk about the operationalization of policies in a certain social setting by means of enforcement, by using punishment and rewards. A core variable driving our design will be how evidence is produced. Let us start our class from returning on some legal theory. According to the classic theory of John Austin, law is the command of the sovereign backed by the threat of punishment. Following this tradition, we know that there should be a sovereign, that is, some form of government, a monarch, a parliament, or other institutions, which is obeyed or followed in some well-defined territory. Typically, a sovereign is defined also by being autonomous, that is, not being controlled by any other entity. Second, we observe that law is based upon command, that is, some linguistic artifact meant to direct, which is necessarily verbalized. Third, Austin makes reference to the presence of some indication about the possibility of punishment. Note that he wasn't talking about the certainty of punishment, but about the threat of being punished in case of a violation of the command given by the sovereign. As observed by Hart and other legal scholars, this definition would be plausibly okay for criminal law, but it fails to capture several aspects of the legal activity, for instance, how to consider contracts, who is commanding whom there, and all forms of institutional powers where the threat play a role there, who is the sovereign. Another classic definition comes from the legal jurist Hans Kelsen. Laws command a certain human behavior by attaching a coercive act to the opposite behavior. It has clear similarities with Austin's view, but also some differences. First, it does not make an explicit reference to a sovereign, nor someone's will. Law exists in itself. This explains also why this school of thought is called positive law, as what defines law is to have been posited, placed within the sources of law. Second, it is about the effect, not really about the means as specific linguistic artifacts. Third, legal norms are primarily about sanctions, because they are about acts of coercion intended to repair failures of social expectations. On these lines, one could further distinguish between sanctioned norms, addressing the legal subjects, and sanctioning norms, the ones governing the legal authority deemed to provide sanctions. We can connect the insistence on coercion to the systemic view presented last week. Indeed, the legal activity is meant to promote normative order according to the provisions written in the sources of law. The threat of punishment is a necessary condition for a legal duty because some type of response occurring after violation is the motive that triggers the very legal activity. In contrast, moral duties do not have punishment. Vegetarians may eat meat, thus violating the moral duties they committed to, but this violation does not entail nothing more than a motive for feeling guilt. For those reasons, traditionally the threat of punishment is taken as a litmus test for classifying rules as legal rules when acquiring knowledge from law. This view is sometimes popularized as there is no norm without punishment. The framework of normative positions advanced by Oefeld, however, proposes a more fine-grained view on the topic. Normally, one progresses from a liability to a duty, and if the duty is violated, to a liability to be punished. So, for instance, a soldier is subjected or liable to the power of its commander. If the commander commands a certain action A, the soldier will have the duty to do A. If the soldier does not perform the duty, he becomes liable to enforcement, that is, it may be punished. As this example shows, the power category plays an important role, even in a completely duty-centered setting. But then, is it all just about punishment? This drawing nicely illustrates the commonsensical view on the ways to reinforce a certain behavior. In effect, threat of punishments, the anecdotal sticks, is not the only way to promote a certain behavior. The same objective could be pursued by means of a promise of a reward, the anecdotal carrots. Interesting challenges emerge when we return on norms. We have some rules and we start analyzing them. Are those rules reinforcing some conduct? Does this reinforcement take the form of reward or of a punishment? Question time. I refer here to a few norms. Please write down, according to you, whether each norm is part of a reward or of a punishment-based enforcement regime. You have 30 seconds. Going beyond analysis, interesting questions concern the policy design problem. Are there any design principles for deciding specific arrangement of enforcement? How reward and punishment interact with legal positions? Are there other cases to consider in addition to the scenario we saw before, liability to duty to liability? Let us go a little bit more into the details of informational systems, and in particular of data sharing infrastructures, as for instance digital marketplaces. In those infrastructures, the technology in itself determines some limitations and opportunities. The rules of the infrastructures define the actual possibilities for transactions. On top of that, we have a hierarchy of possible types of policies. We have agreements and contracts, which are ad hoc rules set amongst players. We have rules concerning the data sharing infrastructure that specify the rules of the game that players can play, as for instance the market rules. We have then legal norms defined by society to which everybody is ought to comply. Typical examples of those are the GDPR and the NIS directive. This map is meant to show that data sharing infrastructures and more in general all distributed informational systems, cyber-physical systems, social-technical systems exhibit a double status of computational and socioeconomic systems, and as such their activities are concerned by a plurality of norms or policies. Three different points of view can be considered. The lowest level point of view, in the sense of being nearest to the computational system, is that of the developer. The developer interacts with the machine by means of instructions. For these reasons, we could think of her or him as providing commands, and so as a commander, which are directly executed by machine operations. The environment considered by the developer is, in most cases, an internal one and completely controlled. The middle level point of view is that of the user. The user is using the system for some purposes that have some impact in an extra computational world. An application policy is reflecting the preferences and desires of this user. For instance, a trading agent is functionally defined on top of the specific algorithms it may call, but we know its function is to operate following the user's provisions on a digital market, which is an environment in which the trading agent has only a partial control and on a local basis. Finally, we have the highest level point of view, in the sense of being more remote from the actual operations. This is the point of view of the policymaker, who defines policies that apply collectively on all decision makers, making sure that they will adopt them. The policymaker has even less controlled environment, which is external and typically operates on a macro level, that is on classes of people, not individuals. In our example, the policymaker would be the market regulator. In order to influence adoption, policymakers design specific enforcement measures. Let us consider an example of second-order guidance problem. We have a consortium of internet service providers, two rules for its members. If you suffer of a cyber attack, you have to share the information about the attack with the consortium. If you are notified of a cyber attack, you have to start defensive maneuvers to diminish its impact and propagation. Now, the problem is that sharing data may be detrimental for the releaser if the released data has competitive value. On the other hand, defensive maneuvers may carry costs for the service provider, as you can lose traffic and produce potential service damages. For those reasons, some or many members of the consortium may prefer not to participate. What enforcement measure to apply then? Any norm has an underlying behavioral preference. In a context C, a certain performance is preferred to non-performance, or vice versa. Non-performance is preferred to performance. This preference can be captured by some objective value function or some ordinal preferences. In terms of enforcement, the same preference can be promoted by means of two norms. By means of a deontic directive, in context C, X has the duty of A, otherwise she will obtain P, or by means of a potestative directive. In context C, X has the power to obtain R by performing A. In both cases, there is an implicit reference to some enforcement, which is possibly providing reward or punishment. Now, from a formal point of view, punishments and rewards are just the same. We can translate the fact that we would like a building to be built before next month with two different contracts. Either I pay you $100, but I take you out $9 as penalty if you deliver at a later date. Either I pay you $91, but I provide you a bonus of $9 if you deliver before next month. From an economic point of view, the contracts are equal. The builder receives $100 if he finishes on time and $91 if he finishes late. the situation is symmetric. Aren't we perhaps missing something? Yes, the two contracts require different types of monitoring. Monitoring in general requires resources, people, expertise, attention, time, and can also be difficult. You need to discriminate true positives from fakes. Now, the proxy evidence used to identify whether a behavior is fulfilling your preference is generally different from the proxy evidence used to discriminate whether your behavior is violating the preference. For instance, in order to conclude if you have worked for this class, I can utilize the fact that you handed in the partial exam. It may be, however, that you worked in any case, but you did not manage, for a series of reasons, to hand in the needed document. Instead, for concluding that you have not worked for this class, can utilize the fact that you have not had access to the material. The target O for checking fulfillment is the handing in. The target O first for checking violation is the access to the material. In this case, I'm rather certain that you haven't worked. However, it may be that you clicked on the video but not followed it at all, so still not having studied. So with this evidence, I cannot capture all violations. In general, the connection between proxy O and fulfillment or proxy O first and violation can have different strength, and the evidence can have different costs of retrieval. Dari Mattiace and Heist observed that in general sticks are preferable, but there are two cases in which carrots do a better job. The first case is when there is a specification problem, that is, it is difficult for the policymaker to define the expected behavior. The second case is when there is a singling out problem, that is, where only some people are going under the burden of applicability. Now, a little bit more about the probability of evidence. Rules about punishment and rewards are conditionals. For instance, if there is a violation, someone can be punished. If we need to conclude that there is a violation, however, we need some evidence. But who is going to provide this evidence? Bohr observed a discriminatory rule existing at informational level with respect to enforcement regimes. Reward-based enforcement, the agent addressee of the norm produces evidence. In punishment-based enforcement, others produce evidence about the addressee. This has some internal counterpart. It would be not rational for the agent to say, I have just violated the norm, knowing that there is some punishment at stake. On the other hand, if a reward is promised, the agent has all interest to produce some evidence. This can be connected to the concept of burden of proof. The burden of proof is duty to provide evidence of behavior. It may be upon the addressee to acquire a reward for the behavior the agent had, or upon the enforcer to acquire a punishment for the behavior of the addressee. Second, the reward-punishment construct reflects two alternative defaults taken with respect to the addressee. In reward systems, the addressee is deemed by default violating. Even when fulfilling the preference but not providing evidence, the agent will be treated as non-compliant. In punishment systems, the addressee is deemed by default complying. If there is no evidence of violation, there is no basis to conclude something different. Intuitively, if most of the people are complying, the enforcer may have a lot of carrots to distribute, and this may cost much more than maintaining a threat for potential sticks. In the second part of this class, we will look at a template showing that these intuitions can be confirmed analytically.